Welcome to Pop-O-Holics, the show about hot takes, hotter than pancakes. We're a couple of boys, the most friendly, with a side of fava beans and a nice Chianti. If this is the first time listening, welcome. Come hang out, sit down, grab a drink. This is Pop-O-Holics. We theme our months. This month's theme is women empowerment, all things focusing on women in cinema. And we talk about a various piece of work or art project. This week, we are talking about Silence of the Lambs. It's going to be very exciting. But it wouldn't just be me sitting here rambling along. I am joined, as always, by my two favorite co-hosts,
Chris Conkling
and Brian Dupree.
And today we have like a super special guest. I'm so excited. One of Brian's friends, Mr. Chip Scambus. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Doing really good. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm a former local TV reporter. Well, not a reporter. I worked behind the scenes. I made the pretty people look good. And now I am a law student in Ohio.
Very cool. We're so happy to have you. Welcome to Pop-O-Holics. So what are we going to be doing on this episode? We're going to do everything we always do, which is starting with Brian's Wacky News Corner, going into our quick hits with what we've been consuming, our community feedback / poll section, and then going on into the main topic. But Chris, just real quick, we have a few corrections from last week we want to address. Would you want to go ahead and tee this up? What did you get wrong?
So first and foremost, loyal listeners, last week when we were talking about what we've been consuming, I was talking about the Ear Biscuits podcast brought to you by Rhett McLaughlin and Link Neal. And I was referring to their YouTube channel, their main YouTube channel, as Good Mythical More, which actually is their secondary YouTube channel. Their main YouTube channel is Good Mythical Morning. So I just wanted to ensure if you guys are looking to look at some of their content, you have the right name. I'm sure if you looked up Good Mythical More, you still would have found them. But
They
still,
were so lost,
Good
Chris.
Mythical
They were so
Morning
lost.
is the morning show on YouTube that you'd want to be looking at.
And that's
Christian,
it for corrections, right? That's it. Yep.
What
Moving on.
did you need to correct, buddy?
Okay, so I had said that I'm Just a Girl, in reference to Captain Marvel, was sung by Pink, when it was indeed sung by Gwen Stefani and the band No Doubt. So look at me
Shameful.
messing stuff up. Yeah, and I was telling Chris offline that when I saw it was like by No Doubt, I said to myself, well, that is also Pink. But no, I was confusing the fact that Pink is her own thing and Gwen Stefani is the lead singer of No Doubt. So I was like double wrong. So I'm glad I wasn't corrected on air because I would have looked more a fool. But that's it for corrections that we're aware of. If you
Look at us
sit-
growing here on the Pop-O-Holics
Yes,
podcast.
if you see anything we say wrong or have any feedback about anything on the podcast, please email us at popholicscast@gmail.com. Without further delay, we're going to hand it over to Brian for our Wacky News Corner. Takes a bat, Chip, doesn't it, into broadcast journalism.
I am not
PTSD.
nearly on that level, and sometimes it feels like Brian and Chris's Wacky News Corner. I get some good help
no,
during
it's
the
all
week.
Brian's.
So the first piece of news, some rumors have come out that Sam Raimi is going to be directing Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness after the initial director left due to some creative differences. So this is based on a quote from him that says, "I gotta say, I wish we had the foresight to know that I was going to be involved in the project." So I don't think this necessarily means he's definitely directing, but at least in a production role of some sort, and hopefully, if it goes as we hope, Sam Raimi will be directing the new Doctor Strange movie.
Yeah, that would be amazing. It's definitely, I would say this quote unquote quote rumor is closer to official now than it was, say, several weeks ago when that rumor first started like roaming around the internet. I think he's a great pick for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, especially since Scott Derrickson, the director of the original Doctor Strange and who was set to direct the sequel, claimed at last year's Comic-Con that he wanted this to be more of a horror film. In fact, the MCU's first horror film. And considering that Sam Raimi is also a horror director with like more of a lighthearted comedic take for most things, I think he's going to be able to find the perfect balance that, Scott Derrickson was looking for and Kevin Feige probably wanted. I would assume, I don't know very much about what transpired, but I would assume that Scott Derrickson was like horror all the way. And Kevin Feige was like, we still kind of want this to appeal to mass audiences. So maybe let's not push it that far. But I think Sam Raimi is going to be a good balance of both of those things. And he has experience in the Marvel world before. I mean, he's responsible for the first Spider-Man trilogy, 2 of which I really like.
Yeah, and hopefully he's learned how to deal with the studio system, and he's in a really good place, and they're not fighting over the script. The script should be complete, so Sam Raimi is just picking it up and going to add his flair to it.
Actually, Scott Derrickson didn't write a single word of the script. That script is not written yet. So we'll see how that goes.
So who is writing the script?
Interesting.
I don't believe we have an official writer yet.
Oh, interesting. You'd think that the script would be in the can based on the Marvel machine. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Christian getting shit wrong already. 5 minutes into the pod. Chip, how do you feel about the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Are you over it? Are you like marveled out? Are you excited about stuff like this?
I was over it a long time ago.
That says it all there. So I'll just say, if it's gonna be full on horror, if we do some Lovecraftian Doctor Strange stuff, I am so here for it. So screenwriters, whoever's making this happen, let's get a little Cthulhu in there. Secondarily, another piece of kind of negative news because of the coronavirus and everything that's happening right now. Comic-Con has officially been canceled for the first time in its 50-year run. San Diego Comic-Con is not going to be happening this year. And Chris, we dipped out early from Comic-Con this year, kind of got in over our heads maybe a little bit. But
Brian, I don't think that had been publicly announced yet.
Yeah, I think that we were unable to attend.
That.
We were only unable to attend because of the coronavirus and it being shut down. That's it. That's the word.
Oh, right. How disappointing. Yes, this has ruined
the official word on that.
That's the...
Didn't mean to spoil that there, but yeah. So Comic-Con 2020 is canceled. I am very sorry for those of you who were planning on going. I know this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for a lot of people, so that's disappointing. But hopefully, hopefully we can get through this and figure out how to have these events going forward. And given all this stuff that's going to continue happening,
yeah, it's hugely disappointing, but also expected. I'm actually surprised they waited so long to announce something like this, considering everything that's going on. I'm also very interested to see if we have any like virtual panels online, considering this is a huge time for Hollywood to go out and market and promote all their new material, Comic-Con. So I'm wondering if studios are going to take it upon themselves to kind of like host virtual panels to promote anything that might be coming down the pipe. Of course, at this point in time, most production in Hollywood has ceased anyway. So what could they really have to promote? So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I know a lot of things like trailers will be dropped here for the first time. So I got to imagine they're going to have to do a new rollout of some sort with some of the promotional material that they've got ready, even with all the production issues that are popping up so far. So moving on to movie news, we've got a new Netflix film that the Russo brothers are tied to. So this is written by Joe Russo. It's produced by their production company and directed by Sam Hargrave, who, as I understand it, was I think the second unit director for Endgame. He was involved in one of the Avengers movies with the Russo brothers, and this is his directorial debut. So this stars Chris Hemsworth, and the Netflix description is: a hardened mercenary's mission becomes a soul-searching race to survive when he's sent into Bangladesh to rescue a drug lord's kidnapped son. So this is actually based off a comic called Cuidad by Ande Parks, and I haven't read this comic. Honestly, this movie...
Wait.
Sort of thing.
Is it Cuidad?
Yes.
It's ciudad, and it means city in Spanish.
Okay, yeah. No, I knew the definition. I apologize for the pronunciation, but
Well, if you guys are gonna get on me for my bad pronunciations,
Hey, no problem. I appreciate the live correction. So yeah, this is Chris Hemsworth. I obviously love him as Thor. Haven't seen him in all that much outside of it. I think this is going to be a pretty straightforward kind of action movie. I'll probably check it out for free on Netflix. But had you guys heard about this one at all?
I hadn't. You said this is under the Russo brothers' new production company?
Yes, it is.
It's interesting that they're kind of just cherry picking the MCU
Marvel
actors
people.
that they've worked with. Yeah, because
Hey,
for
why not?
Cherry, the film that they're coming out with, Tom Holland's the lead. You had 12 Bridges wasn't Chadwick Boseman in that film? He was the lead in that film.
Yep.
And now you have this with Chris Hemsworth. They have a ton of great actors to pull from from that working experience.
That's a hell of a network, right?
It is a
So
network.
I suppose it makes sense. I'm interested to check this out.
Yeah, and they need big names like that to take a huge pay cut in order to like make these movies on like Netflix and stuff. So this is exciting.
Yeah.
If it's anything like, I really like Triple Frontier, which was a Netflix original with Ben Affleck. I thought that was great. So if it's anything like that, in that same vein and has the same kind of budget, that's exciting.
Yeah, so that'll be on Netflix this week on Friday. So the next thing, which as of recording has not come out in the US yet, but as of the release will be out, is an album that is titled 420, appropriately released on 420. This is a synth album by Mike Dean, and it's actually, he's a notorious hip-hop producer, has been around for a very long time, worked with the likes of Kanye West, Tupac, Travis Scott, 2 Chainz, Jay-Z, all of these giant people. So very, very known in the industry. He's putting this album out, and I'm not sure. It seems more so like EDM from what I've heard compared to a lot of his more straight hip hop stuff. So I'm a little interested stylistically to see what happens. But I don't know. These last few weeks, there have been some releases of kind of, I think, under-known producers and artists that are very instrumental in the game and don't get a lot of credit all the time. So yeah, that'll be out, and I'll listen to it and let you guys know what I think at some point. I can't imagine that any of you have heard of this one prior.
I have not.
I have
Christian?
not, but that's why we're friends, because I will listen to it and give my opinion on it. It's
Exposure.
great. Yeah, you're my inside source.
All right, so quickly moving through the last couple stories, couple of TV shows. So there's a documentary coming out by Spike Jonze called Beastie Boys Story. So I kind of got schooled a little bit on Beastie Boys last year when I watched the Rick Rubin documentary, because he was very pivotal in their come up early on. And yeah, so this is one of the members of the Beastie Boys has died, and so it's focused on the 2 remaining living members. And I honestly, after having watched that 4-part documentary, the Beastie Boys were just tangentially associated with it, and I am just craving more information about that period of time and what goes on. I think this is largely tracking their most recent tour that they did. But obviously they'll be talking about their whole career, I'm sure. So yeah, and then Spike Jonze, one of the greats right now, acclaimed director. So anything that they're involved in, I think is worthwhile. And this is on Apple TV, by the way.
Yeah, I've seen this advertised, and I'm interested to check it out. For me, the only drawback is that it's currently only on Apple TV Plus, which I still not subscribed to. Eventually, that's going to happen. But it will have to wait for me.
Chip, you hyped for this Beastie Boys?
Chip, are you still awake? Chip, are you there?
I'm sorry, these are not Chip topics, but
Yeah, I'm here.
So the last piece of TV news, the new show by Pendleton Ward, the creator of the Cartoon Network insane show Adventure Time, which if you haven't watched, you should definitely check out. It is 12 to 14-year-old television largely, but very psychedelic, a lot of philosophical undertones in the episodes, a lot of really great emotional arc stuff in it as well. Very well done cartoon, but his newest one is geared explicitly towards adults on Netflix, and it's called The Midnight Gospel. So the description of this show is: traversing trippy worlds inside his universe simulator, a spacecaster explores existential questions about life, death, and everything in between. So reading about this show, the concept, it's basically like a multidimensional podcast. And Duncan Trussell, who I know of tangentially through Joe Rogan, he's one of that circle of friends who has his own podcast. Apparently, the dialogue from this show is largely pulled from his podcast, but presented as having come from like these different dimensions. So I guess it's being compared to Space Ghost Coast to Coast kind of thing.
Yeah, I was feeling that vibe. I was gonna say that's what the vibe sounds like they're going for.
Yeah, so I was never big into that. It was a little before my time, and I never like dug back into Space Ghost. But this is something that I love, Adventure Time, and I'm just interested in seeing how this show actually works functionally and if it works. So, are you guys interested in this one?
See, it's coming out on 4/20 appropriately. Duncan Trussell's really into shrooms and spiritual. I believe he throws on a shroom fest every year. So very much into the psychedelics. So I probably won't be interested in this, but it's cool that he's making it. Sounds cool.
I'm definitely going to check out at least one episode because I too am a big fan of Adventure Time. Like you said, Brian, that show is chocked full of like tiny little philosophical and existential nuggets. And on top of that, they did an insane job when it came to like building their own mythology over the course of all those seasons. And they were very dedicated to making sure that was maintained, which is very impressive for a children's show, as you said. So
and
I'm definitely
Simon, one of the most tragic characters on screen. Period.
I'm definitely going to check this out, at least a couple episodes.
Yeah, but the charm of Adventure Time is that it's like an existential, exploration into these ideas, but it is guised as a children's TV show, right? So there's a charm to it. I feel like I actually was a huge fan of Space Ghost back in the day when I didn't even understand it. I just really liked it as a kid, but I couldn't tell you why. But I'm not sure that charm will come through in this kind of format. But hey, it's an interesting experiment. We'll see.
Yeah.
So that's it for the news this week, guys.
Brian, thanks for that wacky news. So wacky. Everybody out there enjoyed it. We're going to be moving on into what we've been consuming with our quick hits. Quick hits! Quick hits! Quick hits! Quick hits!
Quick hits!
Quick hits! Talks too long!
A quick hits!
Keep it quick.
All right. Quick hits is the part of the show where we talk about what we've been consuming in all of pop culture. What is our diet? What have we been eating? Chip, you're a very special guest. So we would love to start with you, if that's okay.
Okay. I'm not sure if I'm quite proud of this, but I have recently been binge watching this Australian sitcom called Kath and Kim on Netflix, and I'm not sure if most Americans would like it, because a lot of the humor is based off of puns due to insanely exaggerated Australian accents. Like, there's like these two characters called Prude and Trude who own a store, and they just go like, "Oh, I spilled a latte on the duvet," like, and things like that, just over and over again.
Is that Australian?
Yeah, no, I can't do the accents that well, but like when you listen to it, it's just it's just a bunch of puns, and they also insult each other in really funny ways, and they also wear really hideous clothing, because they're supposed to be just like tasteless people. Kath and Kim are. And it's just it's a wild show. And also, I know that I'm like a year late to the party, but I've been playing Kingdom Hearts 3 for the first time.
How's that going?
A bit disappointing. Not gonna lie. The story got to be so bloated on a bunch of games on different platforms that I wasn't able to fully keep up with, so a lot of the story does not make sense. And when I try to figure it out, there's a lot of effort involved in that.
If you could, can you explain the plot of Kingdom Hearts 3?
How long do you want this episode
Brian,
to be,
can
Christian?
you tell him how foolhardy of a task he just asked?
I would, okay. At this point in the game, I'm like 15 or 16 hours in, probably, over halfway done with the game. I think
Which
right now,
world?
my understanding, I just got through Winnie the Pooh.
Well, that you can do that at any time. Which was the last world?
The last one before that was Arendelle, the frozen one.
You did the Frozen.
The
one.
Frozen World? Oh, okay.
Yeah, so essentially the through line in this game is there's a group called the Organization, which so I guess there was a former group that was like the fake version of this now real, definitely real organization called the Organization. And they are, I guess, it's kind of like a Harry Potter, Voldemort, souls being like in multiple bodies. They kind of say heart instead of soul. And the bad guys are, which they say bad guys often, just to be like, there's the bad guys, because the names of these characters are equally ridiculous. But these guys are trying to basically create shells of bodies to put hearts into to use. So that's kind of, and take over the universe that way.
Purpose, we don't know.
And they might actually be the good guys. I'm just waiting for that twist to happen.
So Brian, I just have to say, as someone who has played most of the Kingdom Hearts games on the various consoles, and knowing you and knowing that you don't play many video games as it is, that was a very good description of what's actually taking place in Kingdom Hearts 3.
Thank you.
Chip, to briefly answer your question, they need 13 pieces of darkness,
souls of
and,
darkness
7
or
pieces
whatever.
of light
I get that,
to open Kingdom Hearts. That's like the easiest way to just say that. And that was unfortunately a piece of information given to everyone in the last Nintendo 3DS game. So unless you played that,
And on
which
Fortnite.
I find to be a very crucial piece of information, you really don't know what's going on in Kingdom Hearts 3. So I'm proud of both of you for attempting to play this game and even try to make sense of what's taking place in front of you. It's impressive.
Not to go too long, I do want to ask, because me and Chris are playing through Final Fantasy VII, which shares a very, very similar combat style to the Kingdom Hearts series. How are you liking the gameplay? Is the moment-to-moment action gameplay very satisfying? Are you enjoying that part of it, Chip?
Not as good as the previous 2 games, to be honest. The only addition that I'm having fun with is every now and again you do this weird thing where you get into a version of a theme park ride and shoot the crap out of people or smash into them with teacups or run them over with a train. And that's a fun, neat little nifty addition. But the rest of it, they got rid of the reaction commands, which I thought were one of the most fun parts of the last game. They did this thing called flow motion, which essentially I was able to run through the game without learning what the heck that was. I just pressed X a bunch of times and apparently it made combos happen. I felt like Kingdom Hearts 2 was a much better gameplay, experience. Plus the camera's all wonky in Kingdom Hearts 3. I don't know. I've been unenthused. The only level that was at all inspired was the Big Hero 6 level.
Oh, that would be cool.
Yeah,
But
I haven't
even
gotten
then,
there yet.
I won't say much then.
Yeah.
I felt like that level was very expansive, but also very empty.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot in it for how expansive they designed it.
Right.
So,
But the dark twist to the story that happens in that level reminded me of the old games, whereas everything else has just been them rehashing the movie lines.
right.
I had
that
noticed
was
that
more
too.
the way in which they wrote that piece of the narrative is it definitely feels like more of a sequel to Big Hero 6 than actually just rehashing, which I can totally appreciate.
Yeah. Also hated the Toy Story level, with all of my being.
Yeah, I think I
But
played that in
actually
a
like that
demo.
one.
I think that was the demo level, right? That's the
Yeah.
only bit of Kingdom Hearts 3 that I played. And yeah, I immediately could tell. I was like, no, I'm good.
Yeah, that level was
Definitely
not
is.
great.
Cool. You've also been reading a book called The Buffalo Creek Disaster. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that'll bore your listeners. It's about a big case that was settled, against a coal company that had built a very faulty dam that broke during a heavy rain in West Virginia. And I think killed 200 some odd people from the ensuing flood and destroyed like multiple towns along the river. And it was one of the first big successful tort suits for PTSD damages against a large company, like a large coal company.
What are you talking
in
about?
the
That sounds
70s.
insanely interesting. What do you mean
Yeah.
for? It's exciting.
Yeah.
So you'd recommend this, and you're reading this physically, not listening to it. I listen to all my books.
Yeah, it's a good book. I mean, it's more interesting to people who want to understand legal strategy behind a lawsuit like that. But yeah, it's a very good book. It's written by the lawyer.
Ah, very cool. So check that out. The Buffalo Creek Disaster, available at Barnes and Nobles if those are ever open ever again. Chris, you actually watched. We talk about this coming out in our news sections the last couple of weeks. The What We Do in the Shadows TV show, season 2. You've watched the first 2 episodes. What can you tell us about that season of television?
Yeah, last week, FX released the first 2 episodes of What We Do in the Shadows season 2. Last week, we briefly mentioned that we thought the show was coming to Hulu free of charge because now Disney owns both of those things. And I'm happy to report that that is indeed the case. So, like I said last week, if you're a fan of the film and you haven't seen the TV show, definitely go and watch season 1. That's available as well. But I'm a huge fan of the movie and the first season of the show, and I'm happy to report that the first 2 episodes of season 2 delivered on the quality that I was hoping for. They've done such a great job of expanding this world and introducing more supernatural beings than just vampires and werewolves. We're now getting zombies. There's this really great gag in the second episode with ghosts. They basically define ghosts as human spirits that are stuck to this plane because they have something they're clinging to. And a little piece of like vampire lore that I never really considered was that they are undead beings. So technically the human that they were at one point has died. Thus, if they had unfinished business, there would also be a ghost of that same person. So there's some really hilarious back and forth between the vampire characters and the ghost versions of their previous lives that they've summoned.
That sounds so good.
I highly recommend this show. As you mentioned last week, Christian, yes, Taika Waititi's humor is a little dry. He's not involved with every episode. He's basically just producing the show with Jermaine Clement. But if you're a fan of his type of humor, you're going to love this show. And also, if you love lore, like vampiric lore and all that spooky stuff, you're just going to love this show. So definitely go out and check it out. Let us know what you think.
Cool. That's What We Do in the Shadows season 2, available on FX on Hulu. If you have Hulu, it's free of charge. Brian, you mentioned last week on the news Mrs. America, and you seemed very, very excited, and that's also on FX on Hulu. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mistakenly did not mention the first 2 episodes of this show are directed by Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck, which may not be a selling point for you guys because they did direct Captain Marvel.
Right.
They also directed It's Kind of a Funny Story, which is a book and that I really enjoyed and enjoyed their take on the movie as well. But yeah, so the first 3 episodes of this came out. It's like an FX on Hulu thing. So they did 3 episodes on the first day, and then it's going to be single episodes weekly on Wednesdays from here on out. Yeah, I have been pretty blown away by this show, honestly. I'm generally a fan of FX, but I didn't know exactly what to get into. I'm very unfamiliar with a lot of history and this period of time, the 70s, the Equal Rights Amendment trying to be ratified. I'm not very familiar with that and what was happening in terms of feminism and the women's liberation movement that was happening at the time. This show just feels so relevant still today. Our main character, Phyllis Schlafly, played by Cate Blanchett, she's a character who's run 2 times for political office, with the backing of her husband one time, who maybe didn't actually think she had it in her. So she wants to go for a 3rd run, and during the course of trying to like ramp up for this, realizes that the right is kind of rolling over on a lot of the Equal Rights Amendment to get a couple other things passed, and she sees a political opportunity to take a hardline stance here to become popular and to become powerful, really. And so it's this very interesting thing about she, prior to this, was only involved in and very concerned with nuclear proliferation and trying to limit nuclear warfare from happening. And that just didn't sell politically, obviously. So she turns and basically starts to have this movement called Stop ERA. They're something that's really interesting that also feels scarily relevant today as they're organizing and it's becoming multi-state, their organization. They start to hear some of the people who are powerful leaders in other states say some very problematic racial things. And she has to make this decision about like, okay, do I want their political power or do I want to kick them out because of their beliefs that I don't necessarily agree with? So it just kind of shows, you know, what politics is, what organizing is in a very interesting way, and fleshes out this character who on its face you may just be like, she, you know, she's standing against her own rights or against her own best interests, and it's not as cut and dry as that, definitely. And we see the other side, the women's liberation movement. Rose Byrne is playing Gloria Steinem. I think she's probably one of the main characters. We also see Shirley Chisholm represented by Uzo Aduba, and that whole story, again, this story is based on historical truth, but I think there are scenes added for drama. But the whole lead up to McGovern being elected as the Democratic nom, and the women's liberation movement pushing for Shirley Chisholm, and what happens, I won't say how it all turns out, but it was just very surprisingly dramatic, and the episode 3 ended at a place that I wasn't necessarily anticipating because I didn't know the history of how things played out. So yeah, I can't speak highly enough about this show. It's got great emotional moments. Definitely, you know, shows the female plight from both sides of the political spectrum. So yeah, Miss America on Hulu.
Very cool, and it sounds like a perfect TV show for, you know, our subject matter over this month. Seems like there's a lot of strong female characters in there. That's cool. You know, I didn't put anything on my quick hits this week, and that's because I've been playing mostly Final Fantasy VII, which we are planning on doing a full bonus ep on. But I will say I'm enjoying it quite a bit. It's not a perfect game, but man, all the feels. This is probably my favorite Final Fantasy since Final Fantasy X. That was like for all mainline entries. So really enjoying it. I got my nits to pick. Hey, Chip, the camera, kind of messing around in that game too. Camera can get a bit wonky. And like every time that you fight, unless it is a giant open arena,
especially if you're locked on to enemies, I've found.
Yeah, sometimes you trigger
We'll get into that.
You trigger like an attack, and your character turns around and does the attack in the exact opposite direction. So that could be tighter. But you
helpful.
know, I do want to shout out the devs. Other than when I was downloading the game and booted it up, the whole sound engine broke, and I was only hearing the like echoes of everything. I wasn't actually hearing the center volume. That was the only major bug besides the camera that I've run into. It is incredibly from a programmed, optimized for PlayStation, programming a game. There's like no bugs. I have saved like a madman because I'm afraid things are going to freeze, because every other game freezes every 5 hours, especially on original PS4. This thing has not frozen once. No crashes. It's incredible. I played it for like 35 hours. So kudos for making a game that's like this bug free. That's pretty great.
It's stable.
It's very not something we are used to in this industry. So kudos for that. So I'm playing through that. We're going to have a bonus up on it. But we're going to be moving right along into our weekly poll.
Please don't leave your thoughts on hold. Come on down to a weekly poll. Please don't leave your thoughts at home. Come on down to a weekly poll.
Hey there, loyal listeners. Welcome back to the Pop-O-Holics weekly poll section. Last week on the show, we had the wonderful guest, Hillary Weiss, on to help us talk about Birds of Prey. So, for our poll last week, we wanted to know which comic book heroine turned silver screen star is your favorite out of these four? Harley Quinn, Black Widow, Wonder Woman, and Captain Marvel. And we got a huge response to this poll. Thank you so much to everyone who participated. And turns out the winner of the poll, 44% of you said that Harley Quinn is your favorite out of all four of those. And you know what? I'm actually not surprised. As we talked about last week, Harley Quinn is a very fun character. Out of all the four that we gave to you, I feel like she is strangely the most relatable. Out of like Gods and Spies, you know, she's kind of the most street level heroine out of all those. So yeah, I'm not surprised at all these. Coming in second, of course, was Wonder Woman. 33% of you said Wonder Woman was your favorite. But yeah, so Harley Quinn was the winner of that poll. We are now hosting all of our polls over on our Twitter account at Pop-O-Holics. We're no longer hosting them on Facebook because, like I said last week, we want to make sure we provide you guys with more robust options. We were tired of just giving you two options to choose from. So head on over to Twitter, and we're excited to see you there.
Chip, who would have you picked in this poll?
Harley Quinn, Black Widow, Wonder Woman, Captain Marvel.
Yeah, I know. It's a probably Harley.
Yeah, going with the popular one. Yep. That's who I voted for.
Brian, what about you?
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree. It's interesting because obviously we haven't gotten the Black Widow movie. We've gotten a lot of Black Widow screen time, but I still feel like I have a kind of a deeper understanding of Harley as a character after her individual movie than I have ever gotten with Black Widow. Even though there has been some emotional stuff and some backstory developed, I think it makes sense why people would go for this route.
Yeah, she just seems a little flat. We've gotten so much of her, but really she doesn't even have that much of an arc in Winter Soldier. Endgame is really the only time they try to give her much more than that. So I think it's pretty sad that we feel this way. ScarJo.
She does a great job.
She does a wonderful job. I just don't think that there's been, they try to push it in game with an emotional arc, but I don't think they've really nailed it with her, unfortunately. We also for our community feedback section, we've got to announce that, there's only about a few people that would know this, but Chris said the word Hitler on one of our episodes, just very willy-nilly. Just, I don't know what his deal was. And I might have captured that audio.
I'm going to jump in and defend myself here. We were discussing Jojo Rabbit, so there was context to me saying that name. Continue.
Yeah. So anyway, he said Hitler. I captured it, and I might have used that audio in nefarious ways to get a hee hee ha ha. Well, on last week's episode, I had put it out, and it was up to the last minute, up to the wire when I published the episode. Man, there was a mistake, and maybe that audio got left in there at one point. And that's not a great look for the Pop-O-Holics show. We don't support neo-Nazism or Nazism in general. It was just a gab. But we've come together collectively to say, you know what? I think we should shut it down. So today, we are going to bury the Hitler button. There will be no more Hitlers said on this show. Chip, you're a fourth party to this. Do you think this is a good idea? Should we retire our Hitler button?
Yeah. What have you all
He's
gotten
like, why
me
did
into?
it ever exist?
He seems very certain.
But theoretically, if you had a Hitler button, you wouldn't press it?
No.
You're a good man. Man, Chip, that's what we had you on. So, without further ado.
Hi Hitler. 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 Hi.
This is not what we should do. This is not. This is the opposite of what we should do. I think it was fine. We should have just left it. We should have left it there. We shouldn't mourn Hitler.
R.I.P. shall not be missed.
And
Dear
new
God.
to the soundboard is just kidding. All right. So that's that. We'll see if that makes the app. What do you think, Chip?
Bit overdone. Not
Like
sure
a
I'd
good
really mourn it.
No, that's why we said shall not be missed.
I mean, I'm gonna.
Let's go ahead and move on from this.
All right. When we come back, we are going to be talking about Silence of the Lambs. Very excited, Chip. You're a big fan of this movie, so
Yeah.
it's going to be it's going to be exciting to talk about it. We're going to be talking about all that and more when we come back on Pop-O-Holics.
A killer is on the loose.
Keeps them alive for 3 days. Then he shoots them, skins them, and dumps them.
A rookie FBI agent is on his trail.
He's got real physical strength, cautious, precise, and he's never impulsive. He'll never stop.
But in order to track him down, she'll have to match wits.
I'll help you catch him, Clarice. Believe me, you don't want Hannibal Lecter inside your head.
With the darkest of all minds.
Just do your job, but never forget what he is.
Oh, he's a monster. Pure psychopath. So rare to capture one alive.
That is from the trailer of Silence of the Lambs, which was released in 1991. It was directed by Jonathan Demme, written by Ted Talley, score by Howard Shore. With a budget of $19 million, it grossed $272.7 million, and it stars Jodie Foster, Anthony Hopkins, Scott Glenn, Ted Levine, Anthony Heald. Is that right? Anthony Heald and Cassie Lemons. This is going to be a very interesting topic. You know, this whole month we themed women empowerment. And off the top of your head, you know, I'd seen bits and pieces of this movie throughout my entire life, but never watched it back to front. And from the cultural impact it has, you wouldn't think that this is a huge kind of female empowerment or female-centric story. But I'd argue as we dive deeper, this movie is so much about, women living in men's worlds. It's going to be very exciting to talk about. We're going to start off with our history, pre-spoiler, just in case you haven't seen this movie that came out 30 years ago. Like maybe some of us on the podcast.
Yeah,
didn't
don't
watch
call
it until-
people out now since you just saw it today.
Yeah, but I wouldn't click on a podcast episode called Silence of the Lambs and expect it not to be spoiled at this point. That's what I'm saying. We're going to talk about our history with the Silence of the Lambs director, Jonathan Demme. Is it Demme? Chip, I'm going to lean on you
I've
for
always heard
expertise.
it as Demme, but Chip, do you know?
I mean, I've always said it that way, but I don't know. I've never heard it said out loud.
Jonathan Demme or Demme, D-E-M-M-E, the director and this movie, what's our history with it? We're going to give our thoughts on the movie overall without spoiling anything too much. And then we're going to go into spoilers with the themes, talk about how the camera work fits into the themes of it, and how does Clarence Starling compare to the other female leads that we've talked about in the entirety of
Clarice.
cinema.
Clarice. How does Clarice?
What did I
You
say,
just
Clarice?
called her
Clarence.
And
That's the male version of this film.
And we're going to talk about how does Clarice Starling compare to the other female leads in
Starling.
cinema.
I'm sorry.
And we're going to talk about how Clarice Starbird. Shit.
We're done. We're done.
You got this.
And we're going to talk about how Clarice Starling compares to other female leads in cinema, the other female leads we've talked about, and the impact on, film history. And then we'll wrap up with final thoughts. So, Chip, you're a very special guest, and you're a huge fan of this movie. That's why we brought you on. What is your history with the director and this movie?
Honestly, I'm not sure how many more of his films I've seen. I mean, I saw...
The only film that I know that he directed is Philadelphia, which I have not seen.
I mean, I saw
did do
Beloved. Don't recommend it. He directed that.
He didn't produce Red Dragon.
Okay.
He had no involvement from what I'm seeing.
Okay. Now, let me see what others of his movies I've
He doesn't
seen.
have all that many movies in his filmography. Rachel Getting Married, I know, was
Oh
another
yeah, I
one
saw
that
that
heard
one.
of.
That was a really upsetting movie. Yeah, no, this is like the main film of his I've seen. I also saw Beloved.
So Chip, you have read the original book, right?
Yeah, long time ago.
Okay, did you read that before you had seen the movie or after?
Afterwards.
Interesting. Okay, do you feel like it's pretty faithful adaptation? I know this is just
Yeah.
on the spot stuff. You probably don't remember.
No,
It
no.
is, yeah.
I could tell while I was reading it how the screenwriter just read it and was just like, I can turn this into a movie.
Okay. So pretty much straight.
So it's definitely deserving of that best adapted screenplay.
I think it gets that Oscar just because of the level of depth that was able to be transferred over to the screenplay. And some of that depth I don't necessarily think is in the book.
Oh, interesting.
So what's your history with the film itself? When did you first see it, and why do you think it had such a big impact on you?
I saw Silence of the Lambs for the first time probably when I was 15. A large portion of that summer I spent watching a lot of the movies that had won the Academy Award for Best Picture. And of course, that one was on the list. And I remember getting to it and thinking, like, right off the bat, that it was one of the more brilliant, like well done movies I'd ever seen. I just felt like it conveyed so much more than the usual movie is able to in its storylines and what it was doing. Just like particularly in terms of the camera work. And of course, Anthony Hopkins' acting was fantastic.
Yeah.
Chris, what about you?
So, Christian, I think you and I are in very similar boats here. Growing up, this was a movie that I saw often on cable, but in chopped up bits. So, like, this is one of those movies where you're scrolling through the channels and you stop and you go, oh, what's this? You see like a 10-minute chunk of the film and then end up going to something else. I can't imagine after seeing this for the first time front to back this week that this film held up very well on cable, even if I had watched the entire thing. Have any of you seen this film on cable? I imagine they would have to cut out quite a bit.
No, watching this movie on TV would just seem like a criminal act.
That's what I felt as I was watching it this week. But yeah, so up until this point, I had never seen the movie as a whole. I was very familiar with a lot of the plot points, considering that this film is heavily ingrained within our pop culture. But yeah, this week was my first time seeing the movie front to back, and it was very good, obviously.
Brian.
So yeah, I think the first time I saw this was probably early college, and I'm not sure if it was because you forced me to watch it or not, Chip. I know we did have a series of movie nights at one point, but I think
pretty sure I forced you to watch it.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised by that. Chip and I were formerly suite mates in college in the dorms, so that was the first time I saw this, and yeah, it was, similar to you guys, obviously in the pop cultural zeitgeist, I was very aware of a lot of the general stuff around this and some of the more notable quotes from it. But actually having watched it, and it's funny because I hadn't seen it in it's probably been 7 or 8 years. I think I had watched it twice before the rewatch here, and I didn't remember it as being a gory movie. And you bring up that point about TV, Chris, and there really is a lot of this movie that is either gory on its face or implied goriness, and it's very intense at times. And I think we'll get into it later, but yeah, so I immediately knew this was an incredible movie. Hannibal Lecter is just so iconic immediately, and Jodie Foster, I feel like I was just talking to a friend last night actually about Contact and how I want to come back to that movie. But I haven't seen a lot of movies that she's in, I feel like, and she just does such a great job of this character who can be so strong and sell the vulnerable moments so incredibly well. And given how tense this movie is, the fact that it can, you can still find empathy for characters in it shows how masterful it is, and keeps you coming back for more. Yeah, there's more themes than we could talk about in a 3-hour episode of this show. I think it's
definitely,
it's got a lot.
Yeah, I had Chris, you're absolutely right. We had a very similar backstory to this movie where I had heard it. It's referenced in just off the top of my head. It's referenced in The Cable Guy. It's you have the oh god, I'm blanking. I had all these lined up in my head, and now I'm
Are you
referenced
really
in
okay
Clerks
with
2?
admitting that you watched The Cable Guy before you watched this movie?
I'm on record as doing it.
Old
I love it.
school Jim Carrey.
I fucking love The
fans
Cable
here.
Guy, dude. The Cable Guy holds up so well. So it's referenced in The Cable Guy. What'd you say, Chris?
Clerks
Jay
2.
and Silent Bob. Clerks 2. You have the dance. Me and Brian did the dance, but we were referencing Clerks, which was referencing Silence of the Lambs.
Silence of the
I
Lambs.
love that Q Lazarus song. I just love it in and of itself. I think it's a really weird, fun pop song. And there's so much the Hello Clarice, which we'll talk about, which is it's one of those strange things where pretty sure that's never actually mentioned in the movie. That's not actually
Did you also
phrased at
just
all.
say that you like Goodbye Horses?
I love that song. And it's tainted now, it's not the same. It puts the lotion
Pardon
in the basket.
pun.
Puts the lotion in the basket. I've said all the side of fava beans. I've said these things and I've quoted it, and it's almost like one of those things where it's like I feel like I've already seen it. But that's why we love this podcast. It's a moment to go back and rewatch these things or watch them for the first time. And this was my first time watching this film, and it blows my mind that Jonathan Demme doesn't have more masterpieces, but I think it goes to show you how he kind of just clicked with the content, and the screenplay is just so incredibly strong. This is one of the best screenplays I can think of in recent memory that I've watched the film and been like, wow, this just front to back is just such a tight woven narrative for the film.
Yeah.
It just fits the format so perfectly. And I'm a big fan of the series Mindhunter. And this obviously has to do with the FBI's behavioral science stuff, which is some of my, I'm not super into the whole murder mystery crime drama stuff as much as a lot of the country is at this moment. It has been for the last 20 years. But I will say that the aspect that I do find most enjoyable is these kind of clinical psychologist perspectives. And by making one of the main characters, the Hannibal character, a psychiatrist, a former psychiatrist, it really just puts a lot of really cool stuff into context. And then in that, it's just so genius the way it positions its female character and everything. We'll talk about that once we get into themes and overall opinions. But yeah, it's crazy that this had the impact that it did, and it's well deserving of it. And I think it holds up. It's a good thing it's not a sad rewatch where you go back and watch a classic that you've heard and quoted so much, and you're like, well, this movie just doesn't work in this time period. I think this movie is even more relevant, today. It is pretty insane how well it holds up. So let's talk about whether or not we'd recommend it and why in a very general sense. Chip, I'll start with you. Obviously, you're a big fan of the film, but what really stands out when you think of, I imagine you rewatched it recently. You think about the first time you saw it and everyone up to then. What do you think? Why do you think the legacy of this movie holds up, and why would you recommend this over a lot of the other classics?
Because it's better than the other classic. Yeah, that's not a difficult answer to give. No, it's just a stellar start to finish, paced correctly, talking more about just, it doesn't rely on the gore. It doesn't rely on the violence. It doesn't, it doesn't use its topic as a crutch. The story of Clarice's relationship to both Buffalo Bill and Hannibal Lecter, as well as the women who were the victims in this case, is just, such a good narrative that it's better than a lot of other much crappier movies like Chariots of Fire.
Whoa, way to put Chariots of Fire on blast.
Chariots of Fire under the bus.
Brian, what about you?
So, yeah, this movie is masterful, and it does things that you see them and maybe you've seen them elsewhere, but just stylistically, the way this movie is shot feels so dynamic and keeps you so captivated with the characters. We'll get into it a little more later, but just things like the straight looking at the camera, delivering dialogue back and forth as if they're just speaking straight into your soul, right into camera. Especially given the dialogue, you mentioned how great the screenplay is, and yeah, can't say it enough. Like, the actors are incredible, and the content they're delivering is hand in hand with how great their performances are. I think Lecter and Clarice are so enthralling to watch on screen. It's a non-sexual dynamic, although it kind of, I don't know, there are times early on where he kind of says something that is questionable. I'm not going to get into spoilers, but I think their relationship and why he's drawn to her, and how the complexities of Hannibal Lecter's character and how their relationship develops over time, I think brings up a lot of very interesting questions about what a criminal is, and what makes someone insane. There's so much to unpack with their relationship, and just dealing with I think you mentioned it earlier, Chris, just structural misogyny, and seeing things like in one of the first shots of the movie, Clarice is still in training at the FBI, and we see her get into an elevator with all of these giant looming men, and it's just such an immediate visual cue to be like, she is in a place that she's not acknowledged as like being the same. It's said so perfectly with this quick visual that is 2 or 3 seconds, and the whole rest of the movie really just drives these messages home and uses the narrative to do it in a way that is really masterful. You guys mentioned the gore. I would say we'll get into references, but something like watching this, I couldn't help but think of the movie Seven by David Fincher, and how much this movie had to have been inspired by just the way Silence of the Lambs makes you feel, and the way the gore is used. So yeah, 100% would recommend. It's incredible top to bottom. And
I would even argue that Seven is more gory than
definitely
The Silence of the Lambs. Yeah. So it's kind of doubled down on the framing that The Silence of the Lambs has utilized. Obviously, I recommend this film. Duh. It's won several Oscars. It's like one of the best films of all time, on the top 100 on AFI's list too, I think. But yeah, you guys have already mentioned a lot. The reasons I would recommend this film: Hannibal Lecter is just a captivating villain. Chip, you mentioned when we were talking before the podcast how he only has like 17 minutes of screen time, which is insane considering how enthralling his character is. And then Clarice Starling is such a strong female character. Brian, you already mentioned this, but the film does a great job of showing that she is confined within a system dominated by men. And even outside of the FBI, we'll probably get into this where we're talking about themes, but there are many characters within the film that kind of show that misogynistic and male dominance. But I think throughout the entire film, even though Clarice has experienced tragedy in her life, she does a very good job of putting on a strong face. And that's one of the reasons why I think we would consider her such a strong and empowering female character in cinema. But absolutely 100% would recommend this film.
Yep. This is all across the board. We all recommend it. I'd recommend it for most people that can stomach a movie like this, just because, like you said, Chip, the pacing is just so perfect. I mean, it is, especially as it ramps up in the back half of the film. I mean, it's just flying by. I mean, this is a very, very, very tight, almost 2-hour film, I believe. Probably one of the tightest. And it's for that reason alone, it's just something that captivates you. You don't want to stop it. Some of these films we've watched in the past couple months, I'll take a break and I'll walk away, and that's to no fault of the film. They're fine films. This one I could not. There was no way that I wasn't going to see the whole thing through. And even though I felt like I knew everything about it, I anticipated that this would be a great film. It really went above and beyond my expectations, and like I said, has really aged well. And I think this movie could come out with a little updated soundtrack and a little better sound mixing. But other than that, you leave the entire film intact, and it would crush the box office. It'd be huge. This is really good, and it goes to show, if you're into Mindhunter, which I certainly was, this is the best episode of Mindhunter. And one thing I really like about it is it's a fictional story, so I don't feel as gross. By the end of this film, you are rooting for Hannibal Lecter in a way, which is very strange. And it doesn't feel as gross because he's not a real person. So just that aspect alone, I think I can digest it a little better and feel better about it. But we'll talk about all that and more as we go into spoilers. So spoilers for, we all recommend the movie. If you haven't seen it, Chip is going to come to your house and beat you over the head because of how silly you are for never watching it. We won't do any of that. We're not violent like Chip is.
Christian and I dodged a bullet.
Yeah. The look on Chip's face when I told him I had not seen the film yet was one of pure and utter disdain. And I want to apologize to you, Chip. I'm sorry I hadn't watched it before. But it's going to lead to some good conversation today. So spoilers for Silence of the Lambs starting now. So the meaty part of the conversation, you boys had hinted at it earlier with kind of male misogyny. Chip, I'd like to start with you. Is there anything else that you find interesting kind of watching it over the years? What themes do you think stand out the most to you?
Oh, I mean, obviously, as with any movie, themes of objectification are rampant throughout this movie, but not just in the men are sexualizing Clarice, like with the two scenes where Shilton, disgustingly flirts with her, and then the bug guy awkwardly flirts with her, and that sort of thing. But just in terms of how each of the characters function as an object of themselves, in terms of their interactions. For instance, Buffalo Bill's interactions with his victims are essentially, skin for him. They're, his new body and that sort of thing. So he's seeing them as objects of what they can provide for his fascination, and his desire to become a woman. And, they're not treated as people in that regard. Also, Lecter is used to not being treated as a person. He's described as a monster by Shilton and others. It's that sort of theme that pervades the movie, and that's also done with the camera work. You can tell, what person is functioning as what to the other with the way that Demme slips in and out of first-person perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, this movie has a ton to unpack, as I told Brian before we started this conversation. Similar to I think, Alien, when we were talking about that. There's just a lot to digest, and on multiple viewings, you're just going to keep getting more and more and more out of it. The few themes that I pulled this time around on my first full viewing of the film, I would say first and foremost were themes of power over individuals. What's his name? Is Crawford the one above?
FBI.
So
not director,
Jack Crawford's
but, yeah.
Right. Jack Crawford's power over Clarice within the system of the FBI. Hannibal Lecter's power over Clarice as the source of valuable information for how to capture Buffalo Bill. Buffalo Bill's power over his victims. There's a lot of like we mentioned earlier, chauvinistic masculine power over women, where in some instances, like in Clarice's case, it's systematic, as I said, and in others, it's violent in Buffalo Bill's case. So I think that's a huge theme over the course of this entire film. And the second theme I kind of pulled from this film is very similar to what Chip was talking about, which is like identity, right? Like all these characters are defined by what they are essentially supposed to be. Clarice is supposed to be an FBI agent, but we find out that her past is actually a little more complex and tragic. As you said, Hannibal Lecter is supposed to be a monster, but he's more than that. He's a psychologist and is a very intelligent individual. And Buffalo Bill, in the most interesting case of identity, is literally trying to become something else, which is why he is murdering and skinning all these women. He wants to transition from a man to a woman to escape his past. So those are just some of the things that I pulled from watching it this first time around. But this is a complex movie.
Yeah, so obviously there's just so much here. Chris, just to piggyback off what you're saying with him wanting to be a woman, I think this movie feels so progressive still that this topic is being discussed in the way that it's being discussed, because Lecter actually becomes a kind of voice of reason here, saying that he's not actually transgender. He's just he was abused, and this is an escapist thing that's not actually based in sexuality. It's more so of an escapist tendency, which is, there's just so much nuance in that sort of presentation of a serial killer, that it's wild. Christian, you said it feels more relevant than ever, and I think it's true that it does. The structural misogyny that we see, I think one of the most powerful examples, and the filming really reinforces this, when her boss Crawford, they go to meet up with the police force, and he leaves her with the rank and file police officers when he goes to talk to the sheriff. And we get this view from beneath all of the people, like basically from her first person perspective, looking at these men who are just like looking at her like, what is she even doing here? And again, so much just gets across from these nonverbal shots. And then afterwards, she confronts her boss about it, and she says, it matters. The cops look at you for how to act. It matters. And he actually apologizes. And the fact that that is addressed and dealt with productively on screen is incredible. Obviously it's probably a little unrealistic, unfortunately, in terms of how, especially at that time, these things would have been handled. I'd like to think.
Yeah, he was pretty receptive to the feedback.
Very, very receptive, definitely.
Very uncharacteristic of 1999, or 1991, rather.
91, right.
Yeah, 1991.
But I still appreciate it being addressed on screen in that way. It felt very productive. And just the whole thing. He wasn't born a criminal. He was made into one by systematic abuse. I think that message in itself is something that the vast majority of people either disagree with or haven't thought deeply about, that those sorts of potentials for the most, some of the most heinous criminals out there, and how like we've talked about, serial killers and true crime is very in vogue right now, and the vast majority of these guys, and that's not to say, because most people who have been abused in their past are not serial killers, do not go on to be criminals, but these people who are the most heinous serial killers do tend to have a history of rampant abuse in their past. And psychologically, I think there's still a lot of growth to have there.
Brian, do you mind if I piggyback off that for just a moment?
Please go ahead.
One of the most interesting things that I found myself thinking about while watching Buffalo Bill during this film is that, as you mentioned, Chip, he refers to all these women as its. They're nothing more than skin, like you said, for his new body. And yet he still has the capacity to love his dog unconditionally. So right. It kind of speaks to what you're talking about, Brian, that mental illness is so complex, and it's not black and white. There are gray areas, and oftentimes it is, like is stated in the film, the system that ends up failing these people. Because he's still capable of love. Unfortunately, it's no longer human love,
Right. And, there's actually a thread in the book, The Stranger, where something similar happens, where you see this guy who is just like a total piece of shit, who kicks his dog around all the time, is just like physically abusive to this dog. And when the dog dies, this is by Albert Camus, by the way, but when the dog dies, this guy goes into such a deep depression, and you see how much he loved this dog, even though he didn't know how to express it in a productive and positive way, But yeah, no, completely agree, Chris, that I think it's reinforced very well when Clarice is watching on TV the mother talking to him and trying to give her daughter personhood. And she acknowledges, she says, oh, it's much harder to kill someone if you think of them as a person. And it's right there in the screenplay, but it can't be overstated.
Well, and it's reinforced very, again, in the reason why this screenplay really stands out is when Buffalo Bill is doing the famous line, "It puts the lotion in the skin," or gets the hose again. He's objectifying her as a human and not as a she or as a you. Mm-hmm. It is doing this. You are just serving this purpose. It's complete and utter objectification in that. So I think that really ties in together really well. You guys have pointed out all the major ones as far as, like we said, objectification, identity, power. Those things are all being discussed really acutely here. I like how it feeds into Clarice's struggle, which is like the hardest thing the screenplay tries to accomplish, which I think it does really well, is revealing more about Clarice as a person and what makes her do what she does. And it's so interesting because it is also comes from a place of childhood trauma. But the way that she decided to live her life because of her father figure, even though it was traumatic, she at least had a guiding star to how she could fulfill attempting to satisfy her inner demons and her childhood trauma. She leads by that example of a quote unquote good man trying to do the right thing. That is still what kind of propels her in the direction. And this movie is constantly, as it is talking about criminal psychology, talking about how childhood trauma propels people in different directions. But we learned this person also underwent that, but was propelled into a different one of non-criminal activities, which I thought was really strong. And it was so smart to include that story as a counterbalance instead of just having it about, childhood trauma leads to, quote unquote criminal psychology. I love how they just categorically said, well, that's not exactly true. Everybody has trauma, and other different factors propel you into different directions. And it leads into the theme of the name of the movie itself. Go ahead, Brian.
No, yeah. I obviously completely agree. The way that it functionally happens too, because we go from, her boss Crawford saying, you don't want to let Hannibal Lecter get inside your head, to it being this moment where I think Hannibal really sees her as a person in that moment and decides, all right, I'm on her side now. I'm going to help her out, because she becomes vulnerable and he can relate to her pain on some level, I think. And I'm not sure if you guys agree with that, but I just thought it was masterful how we go from her trying to hide herself, him like poking and prodding and assuming and saying all these things to break her down, to the point where she eventually, openly gives him this information. I thought that whole relationship developed very well.
Yeah, and you get a sense that Hannibal likes her because she does have depth and she's willing to talk about herself, whereas maybe what pushed him in this direction in one way or another is him not liking any of his patients and thinking that they actually didn't want to get help of some sort. I get that feeling, and Clarice obviously sees it that way because she's very confident when he's loose. She's like, no, like, it's not like that between us, which is very interesting. Like, no, I know he'll eat people's faces, but I have a feeling he's not going to try to eat my face. So how does we talked a lot about it a little bit, but how does the camera work really enforce these themes? We talked about the one-on-one camera shots. Anything else that's standing out or more into those one-on-one shots? Anybody's free to jump in here.
So one thing that I noticed from early on is the long one takes following Clarice. I think especially, it all feels like, especially having watched the movie before, it all feels like building up to Buffalo Bill following her around his house, very stalkerish, very like, this is something, she's being followed this whole movie. So the camera being a character in that way, I think, was something that immediately stood out to me as having noticed and reinforcing the themes.
The fact that the film begins with that, even before we're introduced to any type of conflict or for lack of a better term, villainy, there was a sense of tension when she is leaving the training course and walking into Crawford's office and the camera's following behind her. So I completely agree with you, Brian, that it does feel like there are multiple instances within this film where the camera is stalking her prior to us having a literal character stalk her at the end of the film.
So something else that, and I'm not sure if the progression works out exactly how I remember it, but when Lecter and Clarice are getting the closest, when they're really, exchanging information, they're doing these very close cuts from their face looking directly into the camera. I brought it up a little earlier, back and forth, and it builds up to Lecter being you seeing a reflection on the glass of Lecter while Clarice is talking. And that whole thing, it building up to that just felt, I don't know if there's, I don't know exactly what's trying to be expressed, but it's so effective in just highlighting how creepy it is to see his floating face there. It's
like an uncomfortable sense of intimacy between the two of them. Like they're separated between this pane of glass or these barriers, and yet with the reflections, they are literally right next to one another. So I think it's just there to like perpetuate that really uncomfortable sense of intimacy between the two of them.
The camera work, as Brian was talking about earlier, it's never supposed to feel like Clarice isn't being stared at, except for in the scenes that, Clarice is not in them, like when Ruth Martin's daughter gets abducted. And I think that just goes as part of, Clarice's own self-pressure on herself to be successful in this regard. It's like she feels like she's always being watched while she's doing this, and that's what those camera angles accomplish, in particular. There's also, a lot of shots from her perspective to indicate that people are staring at her. Like, whenever she's in a first-person shot, it's almost always a group of men or one man who is staring intently at her and sizing her up. And I feel like that's, the movie never takes an opportunity, or never fails to take an opportunity to remind you that she's a woman. Like, even down to the point where, how Miggs deals with her in the insane asylum with his, craziness, where he just ends up, doing what he does. So
gross.
Yeah.
By the way, I do want to say, like, there's a lot of disgusting stuff in this film. People's chest open, but I feel like if you've played a lot of video games, watched a lot of horror, we're pretty desensitized to that in a lot of ways. I think the film does it pretty masterfully in a way of not it being shocking and gross. That scene is one of the most horrific things I've seen in a movie in a long time. Like I don't know what they're using for fake semen, but it looked very. If you would have said actually that was real cum, I would not be shocked. It was very gross looking.
Ew.
Who are the people? That's not the Foley people, right? Who are the production designers?
Like props, art directors.
Shout
There was an
out
art
to
director who
the
signed
art
off on the cum
great
recipe.
Consistency, great color. It's really top notch.
Just
that guy's like, you want me to make what? Yeah, that was I agree with you, Christian. Even juxtaposed against all the gore in the film, which again, like I mentioned earlier, isn't a lot. That's definitely the most disturbing scene to me too.
And it also kind of drives her and Hannibal's relationship, right? Because he's so disgusted by that as well. Even though I think after that he makes a joke about like. When he's just trying to get under her skin about, do you think your boss fantasizes about fucking you or something?
Yeah,
and I can't remember if that happens right afterwards or not. So he's still there, and she calls him out for it. She calls him out for it too. But yeah, I think that's, like you said, it's such a ridiculously horrifying moment, and can somehow drive their relationship forward as well.
Well, because Hannibal's whole thing isn't he's not a sexual murderer. He's like, it's more of a power thing, and it's more about, he's literally consuming his victims. There's like a level of you know, God, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm trying to think of it. Like
His quick hits would have a different connotation.
Yeah. There's a je ne sais quoi about the way he murders people that I think he thinks is a more like, because he's very into art and he's very
It's
well
more
groomed.
spiritual.
Yeah,
Consuming an individual is like you're consuming their life force, their energy. You know,
Okay,
they're becoming
okay.
a part of you.
Wait a second. I have to, because I did notice this time around when Hannibal kills one of the cops, it's like a pseudo crucifixion thing. And I hadn't thought about it in terms of him like literally eating the body of people. But yeah, there might be some underlying
I think that's
something
I don't
there.
know. That might be a little bit of a stretch, Brian. I'm pretty sure it's based off of a famous painting.
Chip, I'm not going to get into it, but you would say that, wouldn't you, Chip?
I just think it's based off of a famous painting.
Oh, okay. So they're referencing a painting with when he's hanging up.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah,
I'm
school me, because I
like-
did not get that reference.
Yeah. That's what's going on there. Let me see if I can
don't
figure out the
know.
name of the painting.
While you're looking for it, I'm not saying that it's not based off a famous painting, but he orders lamb. They talk about lambs, and Christ is the Lamb of God, of which he slaughters and spills his guts, much like Christ had his side pierced and spilled. And so I think there's a lot going on there in regards to Catholicism and consuming the blood of Christ and stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if they're not trying to go for a little bit of that.
But it could probably be both.
Yeah, well, of course.
no
Yeah.
doubt,
Well,
no
also,
doubt.
I thought most practically, it's a great distraction for when you're trying to wear someone else's face to escape in an ambulance.
Yes, just very practical too.
Yeah.
That whole thing, just
I mean,
such brilliance.
that's the part of the movie that enters into genre film.
Yeah, for sure. It's a little, because I was sitting there going like, that's Anthony Hopkins. Like immediately. I had not seen this film yet, and I was like,
Really?
oh, you can see by the side of his head. And like as soon as he gurgles up some stuff and starts seizing out, I had called it like, oh, that's how he's getting out. Pretty early. Not to say I'm super smart. I think it's pretty obvious, and the police are pretty dumb. But yeah, you're right. It kicks into like action thriller, like and gets outside the realm of kind of the real world. But I think it ramps up to it so smartly, and we've built up him as a killer, and it is almost his, and which is kind of gross. But again, I think it's a little better because he's not a real person. You're kind of rooting for him to get out of there. And you're kind of like, I don't know. Like when he went to go beat that dude's face up, maybe I'm a sick son of a bitch, but I was like, oh, Anthony Hopkins just had his, claws put back on. And I was kind of excited. Did anybody else have that feeling when they were watching it? Or am I a disgusting human being?
Chip, what are your thoughts?
I don't know. I'm intently researching.
Okay. I agree with you. There is like a sick part of me that is rooting for Hannibal Lecter in this film, but also it's because he's so charismatic and captivating and intelligent. Like it's almost as if murdering is an art form for him, where you're juxtaposing Hannibal Lecter to Buffalo Bill, and yeah, it's just Buffalo Bill goes about it in like a more grotesque way, Whereas consuming your victims, leaving no trace, like we were talking about earlier, is maybe a little more spiritual. I can't believe we're phrasing it in these ways. But
So, Chris,
no,
you're
Christian
basically
and I are
saying-
on the same page. Like you are kind of rooting for him to get out of there.
And see-
Because Anthony Hopkins, in the terms of identity, knows who he is. Buffalo Bill does not. So Anthony Hopkins has accepted his personhood, and there's like a level of, and there's a level of vengeance to, especially the previous jail owner, where you're like, I don't mind that guy's about to get his face eaten off. Brian, continue.
I'm having an old friend for dinner.
Yeah, exactly. At that point, it almost feels like a Dexter thing where it's like, we hate that guy. No one likes that guy. We're fine with him dying.
Yeah, and oh my God, what a brilliant death scene by the cops. They're totally stupid. We were like, we're just gonna go into this. Like they handle him so, they put him in like that awesome straight jacket mouth guard thing, and they handle it so well. But then when they're feeding him, they're like, and we're gonna handcuff him while we walk in and turn our backs to him and bend over right in front of his face. Like, it's so stupid. But like the scene when the cop's about to get beaten to death, the yell, oh my god, it's so good.
But I also think the way in which they're handling those situations feeds that theme of like that misogynistic ego and male power, and like they are stupid because they're so confident and arrogant in the system that they've created. You know?
Yeah. He asked for 2 dinners. Well, how weird.
Yeah, Jesus.
Very strange. Let's turn our backs to him. I don't know why I gave him that access. Chip, any update on all the research that you're doing?
I don't know the name of the painting, but the painter is Francis Bacon.
Ooh, bacon.
Okay, I could see
pork,
that.
which is not allowed in certain religions. I think we're onto something.
Francis Bacon, big influence to Christopher Nolan and like the look of the Dark Knight in films like that. I know he's a big fan.
Yeah.
Very
so
cool.
I don't know the name of the painting, but I know the painter.
Well, I think that solves it.
Yeah.
Questions answered.
So there, Brian, skepticism justified.
Hey, I believed it. I believed it.
As far as other like camera work stuff, and this is going to lead into kind of the next topic, one of our final topics we're going to have. You guys are right about the characters looking directly on camera, except for Clarice herself. And I think this movie, with the way that the camera tells the story, you've said it, the perspective of the big men always staring at her, her feeling that like the odd person out of any given situation, kind of this feeling of powerlessness, all conveyed through the camera work. But what's so brilliant is, out of all the movies that we've talked about with females as the lead center, this film makes a really great attempt, and I think succeeds in a lot of ways, of actually taking the fear, the thrill of these psychopaths, these murderers, serial killers, and the type of fear that they put on people that are like women that are just less capable of defending themselves or in a place where they're more targets. This film really puts you in the shoes. In those one-on-one shots, one thing that I noticed right off the bat is although the men will be staring directly down center line of the camera, Clarice's eyes are just slightly off center as she's looking off. So the film makes sense in the perspective that it puts these dialogue scenes in this way so that the film makes sense and we can see the performance of Jodie Foster. But just doing that subtle off look makes it so that we feel like we're her and we feel like that we're being talked to and we're being looked down upon. And I found myself much more scared in the situations that she would be afraid in, not only in our final night vision goggles scene where he's stalking her through the dark, not only through the men looking down on her, but even just the moment to moment thing, the subtle things of her being in the training and the men just beating the shit out of the practice a shield that she's holding, and you can tell she's barely holding it, and it looks like the men are going even harder to try to push her down and knock her around. It's just genius stuff like that I think makes you feel more like her and makes you more kind of afraid in the same way that she would be afraid, which I think is really effective in telling the story of how sometimes women, a lot of times in our society, women are preyed upon in so many different contexts.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with you. By the time we get to that final scene where she is all by herself in Buffalo Bill's house, lurking around trying to find him, Jodie Foster's doing such a great job. I found myself, especially after she leaves Buffalo Bill's victim and she's like, the other agents are on their way. There's a moment where you're like, I don't think they are. I think you're
she's totally lying at that point.
She was saying that.
Like
to,
just to like make the victim feel better, and I think make herself feel a little bit better. But she's doing such a great job acting during these scenes. Her heavy breathing, the way in which she's moving around the house, like you can tell that she's terrified because this guy is, again, in his 30s, 40s, and we already know that Jodie Foster is a small woman. But despite all that, she is still courageously moving forward and not letting her fear prevent her from finishing the job. I just think it's a great final scene.
Yeah, he's like towering over her. It's pitch black. She's clearly scared and does in a very bad situation. And yeah, that even though I feel like I knew what was going to happen, it didn't even matter because it was so well executed. And that leads us into our final conversation, which is, what is the difference between, how do we feel like this compares? What are the similarities? What are the differences between the way that Jodie Foster's character is represented on screen in her story? And how does that, compare to the rest of what we've talked about this month and other females in cinema?
So I'll hop in here. I think this one kind of almost stands apart compared to some of the other stuff that we've watched, because I think Clarice Starling's character is largely asexual in terms of like just open sexuality and relationship dynamics in a way that is similar to someone like Ripley. But Ripley could have been a man, and this story is very much only about a woman, and it wouldn't have worked nearly the same had it been a man in this role. So I think it definitely stands apart in that sense. I
think a man would have died in Alien.
Well, Chip, I don't know if you listened to our episode, but the screenplay was actually written originally to be either sex. Like, the characters didn't have genders when the screenplay was written. So, it was
sure, the
largely based on...
screenwriter could have done that, but if they'd casted a man, I don't think it would have been believable that he would have made it to the end.
You're right. And he would have been wrong. He would have made all the wrong decisions, and the movie would have been like half hour instead.
Well, there were other men in the film, and they all did die. So you're correct.
So
I'm on Chip's side.
That tracks. But yeah, I think it's really interesting because something like a Captain Marvel, where the message is you're being too emotional. Don't let your emotions judge your actions. This is what's interesting about this is, in terms of the FBI, no one thinks of the FBI and they're like, yeah, these are very like gregarious people who, have like big personalities. And to put her in this role that kind of goes against what you'd expect from stereotypical female qualities in terms of doing things by the book, hiding yourself in public to a large degree, and just showing that how much more difficult it is for a woman to be in that space. And obviously, like I said, we don't get into how that affects her relationships, but I have a feeling that Clarice doesn't date often. I think she's probably very consumed by her job in a way. Chip, is this an agreement?
No, this is disagreement.
Oh,
I think that Clarice Starling, well, I don't know. There's multiple ways of interpreting it. But I think that Clarice Starling was as much of a lesbian as was allowed to be in a movie in 1991.
Okay,
I would
agree with that reading, actually, because she has that female friend, and yeah, like, I mean, it is kind of read in an asexual way, but nothing's ever explicitly stated. But I agree with Chip. She seems off-put by most of the men in the film, so despite them being serial killers and creeps. All the men she interacts with are kind of gross anyway.
No, yeah, definitely. So, no, I agree with that. And I think, Chip, that's a really interesting reading that I think it's very fair to argue.
You guys didn't get the vibes coming off that cross-eyed guy in her? I was like, this is hot and steamy.
He was definitely feeling it, but she was having nothing to do with that guy. I just
a bunch of assholes.
Just to kind of wrap up my point about, seeing a woman in the FBI that way, something that I appreciated, and it was just, like 5 seconds of screen time. I can't remember. She breaks down crying at one point, and we see it for like 2 seconds, and then the next shot is her firing on the gun range.
Yeah.
And it just seems like such generally the guy is getting his anger out through this, but seeing it be a woman, maybe it's just a small thing, but it felt like, okay, this is awesome to see her just like letting her anger out on the gun range, which is kind of like a classic cop trope,
Well, it's the feeling of empowerment that we were talking about, right? And that is so much of what firing a gun, and that's why I think a lot of men do it too. You get like nice and scared and a lot of anxiety. Like, go fire off a couple rounds and you'll feel like a fucking superhero. I think that's the idea, is that she's handling it the same way that a lot of the men character do.
Chip, you look like you have something to say.
Yeah, I don't really think that that's what that scene's doing. I think that scene is her trying to be good at it. Because the scene that's immediately follows her at the gun range is that drill exercise where she breaks into the room and doesn't check the corner. and gets called out for that. I think it's more of a transition back to her time at the academy with her actually like trying to be a full-fledged FBI agent and dealing with whenever she's not perfect, they're going to be like, oh, it's because she's a woman. That's what I think is more going on there.
I read it as like a flashback, right? Not necessarily something that's happening chronologically.
Oh, I think it's the next thing that's happening. I think it's her returning to the academy after leaving Baltimore.
Well,
Gotcha.
I think we're both right in the sense that it is her. How do you treat your fear of the unknown, of dealing with the potential threat of violence against you? You get better at marksmanship, but I think it also accomplishes that release of fear and anxiety through a feeling of being powerful. Mm-hmm. So I think you're right in the plot reasons, and I think it signifies all of those things. If I'm making myself clear.
Yeah, so I think...
Shut up, Brian.
No, what? I was just going to say, I think...
No, I disagree. I don't think it's a power thing. You were just like... Which I'm taking as you disagree with me, but that's fine. It's fine to disagree. I was having trouble reading your response right there. And you're still not going to clarify it, so good.
Nothing else needs to be said. This is great.
This is why we need to do video recordings of these podcasts. So.
I'd be like, Chip, are you still there? Chip, did you hang up the call?
I think this movie, similarly to, the best stuff that we've talked about this month, is able to tell a solely female story that doesn't, what's the word? Something like, like a Captain Marvel where
we've done this every time.
I know it's hard. It's hard. It's a bad reference point. We're just trashing it, but
I think it's a poster child. It's the poster child.
Yeah, the poster child. So it's able to tell an incredible story that can allow people of like men and women alike to relate and empathize and be afraid for Clarice Starling and see how difficult the situation is that she's going through and really be there with her in a way that a lot of movies maybe make it more difficult for men in particular
and get
to
behind her and respect her. There's so much respect.
Exactly.
She is able to be super vulnerable and have the real consequences of being a woman in the FBI and talking to serial killers. But yet she is such a strong character, and we root for her, and you fear for her, and you feel for her, but you don't. At least in the perspective of I think all of us watching it, you don't look. You're not looking down, or you're not like, oh, like this movie's all about trying to be like, well, women can do it just as good. No, it's like, dude, it's harder than it would be for a man to go through it, and I think that is so much more powerful, so much more honest, and so much more effective in storytelling. Chip, who's is this your favorite female protagonist in film?
No. Sarah Connor.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Pretty good one.
Okay. Yeah, hard to argue that.
Yeah. No, Clarice is great, but no one can touch Sarah Connor.
She's got a pretty good 1 to 2 movie arc, too. It's cool to see her grow through all.
I pretend that one doesn't exist.
Hot takes from Chip here.
I do prefer T2 to the Terminator, so I kind of agree with Chip, but I do think the first Terminator is important to her character arc.
Honestly, that first Titanic didn't happen either. The James Cameron sequel is the only one that ever existed. So bad.
What are you... So, if we're continuing to talk about this and compare Clarice Starling to other female characters that we've kind of mentioned over the course of the last couple episodes, I agree, out of all the movies that we've talked about, I think that she most closely compares to Ellen Ripley from Alien, like you said, Brian, not only because she's a woman in a system in which men are just stupid AF and not listening. But she's able to overcome those systems. Sarah Connor is a great female heroine, though, in cinema. And I'm sad that we've yet to watch one of the Terminator movies during this month.
Chip, do you think we should watch Terminator 2? You think that's a good continuation of female empowerment?
The only Terminator, yeah.
Yeah, it's weird that the first one is called Terminator 2, but, you know, it's a time travel movie, so.
Correct.
The first Terminator is not that bad. In terms of the entire Terminator series, the first one is undoubtedly the second best one. No?
I mean,
Agreed.
sure, but, like, I'm sorry. I don't reconcile the Sarah Connor of the first movie with the Sarah Connor of the second movie.
Right, because of the growth that character goes through.
You see, I don't define that as growth. I define that as two different people and one director who understood what
But don't you think
Sarah
almost
Connor
being
was,
murdered...
and one who just decided to play her as a damsel in distress? Sorry, I don't have a lot of respect for how Sarah Connor was written in the first movie.
All right, this episode's transitioning from a Silence of the Lambs episode into a Terminator discussion. Here we go. Let's do this.
I have opinions about Sarah Connor.
I like them.
The Terminator is a very different movie than T2. I'll just say stylistically and definitely in terms of how.
Yeah, and T2 is much presented. Better. Everybody agrees with you. So that's
T1
good.
only exists for
it's not called T1. It's called Terminator.
Plot twist that he's the good guy in T2.
Uh-huh.
Like for the one scene where he pulls the shotgun out of the flower box. Like
you don't think that almost being murdered by a murderous robot from the future and learning of humanity's ultimate demise to these robots would be incentive enough to like work out a shit ton while you're in an insane asylum?
Yeah, she only becomes a badass because she's traumatized from the first film. It is absolutely vital to her character. If Terminator 1 doesn't happen, she's just a crazy person and she deserves to be in the psych ward.
I don't think that being a badass constitutes being a person worthy of an insane asylum.
She's a doomsday prepper who talks about the end of the world and did criminal activity.
Like, I think that Terminator 1 would have been a much better movie if she was just, like, ready to go as a waitress. Like, once that robot came, she was ready to keep up.
She pulls the shotgun out of the flower box.
That would have been insane.
That would have been a much better movie.
You know, in a different universe, that's the idea that James Cameron wrote down, waking from a dream. Because isn't that the origin of Terminator? Like he was dreaming about it, and then he woke up and like wrote down like a pitch for it. And
honestly,
then that's what
I don't know.
the Terminator.
I'm not that well researched on Terminator 2. I just know that Sarah Connor could have been a little bit more pumped up, but the 80s just wouldn't allow a female role to be that way unless James Cameron was directing the movie.
Funny enough, the art direction by Terminator heavily influenced by Francis Bacon.
What do you know? I've got
Francis
a pattern.
Bacon, notoriously well-drawn semen in his work. So,
oh my God.
That's good to know.
Cut.
Sailors. Get your mind out of the gutter, Chip. Such a dirty boy.
No.
All right. Any final thoughts on Silence of the Lambs? Semen or otherwise?
I'm going to say, if you are like half of the people on this call and had not watched this movie, please watch this movie, because it is something that, even if you think you know it, it is quite a ride and something that you will not regret having seen.
Yeah, I would say that while the subject matter could be alienating for some, like, because I know there are people out there that don't necessarily like this genre or this type of gore, even though as I mentioned earlier, it's lesser in this film than it is in other movies. We're not talking like murder porn here. Try to branch out and watch this movie, even if you think that it's not your cup of tea, because I think you will get something out of it.
Ellen Ripley is more BA than Clarice Starling.
Why? Why, Chip?
I don't think Clarice Starling would have been able to get that airlock timing in that way. And
I'm just saying, Clarice Starling definitely a dog person.
Clarice Starling should have been more pumped up, all right? She should have been preparing for the robot apocalypse.
Clarice
that way
was perfect for what she needed to accomplish in that movie. I'm just saying, here's my evidence that Clarice Starling is less BA than Ellen Ripley with the airlock. Did you see how long it took her to reload the gun after she shot Buffalo Bill? Like, I get it. You're in shock. Like, I understand that that's the natural result of what's going to happen. But Ellen Ripley is faced with an alien that can kill her with 6 different methods. And she still manages that airlock perfectly. So that's why I say Ellen Ripley is more BA than Clarice Starling.
Yeah, that wasn't the question that we asked. But
you asked final thoughts on Silence of the Lambs.
That's his final thought.
And my final thought
think it's a fantastic
is that Ellen
final
Ripley
thought.
is more BA than Clarice Starling.
Chip says, Clarice, go back to the range, honey.
No, I don't. Clarice is perfect for what she needs to get done. She
But in
shows
terms
what
of
it's
if
like
she was-
to be like a real woman handling like a real life scenario of going to the FBI Academy. Whereas these other two are like fictional sci-fi paramilitary badasses.
To be fair,
Sure.
Ripley is not a paramilitary badass. Ripley is a miner.
I'm sorry,
She's
I'm
a
thinking
space miner.
aliens.
Yeah, but she's still a space miner. She just meets up with some handsome.
You
not.
tell me that she's not like done paramilitary like nonsense when she wielded that flamethrower that way.
Oh yeah, she had
That
held the gun
wasn't
previously.
just space mining that taught her how to do that.
Fair enough. Agree to disagree, Jim. Agree to disagree. She's a space miner. So, that's the final thoughts on Silence of the Lambs. Go see it unless you want to watch a movie in which someone is good at killing an alien. There is no alien to kill, so we will never know whether not Clarice or her alter ego Clarence could ever take out a science fiction alien. That's about it. Chip, thank you so much for being on the show. We were so happy to have you. We hope you enjoyed being on it.
Yeah. It's a good movie. You should be ashamed that it took you this long to watch it.
Yeah, but if you could go back, if you know, like, would you want to watch this movie as if it was the first time you'd ever seen it? Would you enjoy doing that?
I would be ashamed of myself that I did it so late in life.
Well, I haven't seen The Godfather Part 2 either, and I think I'm going to enjoy it a lot. I think there is something to be said about seeing really great movies as a mature adult and seeing them for the first time with fresh eyes and good perspective.
I'm happy I watched it at the age I did.
I'm happy
That
you
was
did.
the correct age.
The perfect age that everyone should base their perspective around.
All right, so if you haven't seen Silence of the Lambs and this movie or this podcast convinced you to, Chip says, fuck you. You should have seen it sooner.
You missed your opportunity. Sorry, guys.
No, it's just you should feel the requisite level of guilt.
I feel it. I feel it. I feel
As do I.
I feel like Miggs just threw it right in my face.
Well, that wasn't the effect I was going for, but
I've got to take a shower. You can find more episodes by searching for Pop-O-Holics Pop-O-Holics podcast on your favorite social media platforms. Pop-O-Holics on any podcast platform. Rate us 5 stars if you enjoyed it. If you're Chip, you'd probably give us 2.5 stars, 1 star. I don't know, Chip. What would you do? 3-star rating?
2 stars
on a
for
good
2
day?
people having seen the movie at the appropriate time.
But we encourage 5 stars, but you can lambast us for not seeing this film sooner. Please go participate in our weekly polls. You can find those at Twitter, searching for Pop-O-Holics Podcast. Chip, once again, thank you so much for being here. Chris and Brian, thank you as always for being here. And you can check out next week's episode. We'll be signing off. See you next week on Pop-O-Holics.
Sound you hear is Oscar buzz getting louder and louder.
All right, we should all wear our skin suits now when he comes back.
Oh, fuck.
Oh, good. I thought you'd never ask.
That's why you guys asked me to be on, because I collect skin suits, right?
I wonder if I'm about a size 14.
Oh, I did like the American Girl track. I thought that was genius.
Before she gets a
Oh, yeah. I can't hear that song without thinking of that. Like, not possible. Like, when Tom Petty died, that's, like, what I associated it with.
Really?
Yeah. I, like, couldn't hear... Like, that's just what I remember. That song is in that scene right before she gets eaten.
Well, that's how many people view Q Lazarus, but I like that song, and I had only seen it in the jokey context, and it's like, everybody else is like, if you put that song on, you're weird. And it's like a weird song.
I like that song, too, so I guess...
Well, I mean, you also weird. Like Goodbye Horses.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's the song I'm referencing.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
How do you not like that song's a banger? That song's a bop.
That song was designed to be like, or was picked for that movie because it's that creepy. Like, a guy doing that dance in front of the mirror to Goodbye Horses, like, that's like, on my first go through, it was just as funny as it was horrifying.
No, it's certainly creepy. You're not wrong there. But I suppose because Christian and I hadn't seen the full movie up until this week, like it's got a really
infectious melody line.
Yeah,
with the guitar part, I really like that tone of the guitar. It's got redeeming qualities.
It's like it's just supposed to be creepy.
The song wasn't made to be creepy though. They used the song in juxtaposition of him dancing around to create a creepy effect, but the song itself is not a creepy song.
No, disagree. Goodbye Horses is objectively a creepy song.
You got the association early. It's understandable.
Yeah, it's probably because you watched it so early in life, and you probably watched it, I mean, dare I say, too early.
Isn't it in a minor key?
It might be, but that doesn't mean that it's... Music is more complicated than
QED creepy.
All right, we're gonna have a Goodbye Horses episode as well.
You got me there.
Yeah, I'll rate that 1 star. Boo. Improper opinion about Goodbye Horses.
Chip, just so you know, we will read any 5-star review given on any podcast platform. So if you give us 5 stars on any platform, you can write whatever the fuck you want, and we will read it on the air. So
no, too much integrity.
By the way, Goodbye Horses is in F major.
F major? Really? Those like weird pings, like bing, bing, like that.
Well, pings are not minor; they can be in a minor scale. But the chords, I believe it starts with a minor chord. So F major would be relative, not down a bit. D sharp minor would be the relative. Every major has a relative minor. No, D minor. F major is going to be D minor. So you can technically say it's also in the key of D minor.
When it's with that, it definitely is.
Yeah, which is why you think it's creepy, but you don't seem to understand that's what we're saying. Which is we heard it first without it being associated with creepiness.
Look, I mean, Jonathan Demme chose to do what he did with that song Because it's creepy.
Yeah, you know what else is creepy? Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, but filmed to like black and white serial killers murdering people. That's also creepy, but Twinkle Twinkle Little Star is a nice, adorable little nursery rhyme you sing to your child, but can also be creepy in the right context.
Agree to disagree. We're gonna unplug this.